This is the Patriots Prayer Network, where truth matters.
The following is a presentation of AOW Productions.
The views and opinions expressed by the host of this program do not necessarily state or reflect those of this station or its management.
Every patriot has an obligation to question authority. Those who are honest are not concerned with your watchful vigilance, and those with integrity are not concerned with your discernment. Every American is obligated to voice their concerns and stand up for their freedoms and liberties.
One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are the men in the arena. We are the Patriot Confederation.
We will never back down from a fight. We're undefeated Americans.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, if you are watching this means it is December 24th, Christmas Eve. Yes, indeed. Welcome to Patriot Confederation. I'm your host, Bad Billy, out of Twin Falls, Idaho, joined, as always, by John Grosvenor out of Nashua, New Hampshire, New England area. What's going on up there, brother?
Not a heck of a lot, Billy, man. Just looking forward to the holidays. Going to have a lot of fun. I want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, and Happy Holidays, man.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And joining us this week for the first time on Patriot Confederation, we are joined by a musician. Yes, indeed. I want to welcome Rick Revel to the show. Rick, thank you very much for joining the show. How are you today?
Good to be here with you.
Yes, indeed. So I discovered you while listening to you on the Caden Gordon show, and his show's strictly about the music. Of course, this one here, we're a conservative talk show, but you expressed on that show of how much of a God-fearing patriot you are, and your music speaks volumes. But to introduce you a little bit more to the listeners, why don't you give a little background about yourself?
Well, it all started. That's where you started. It all started. The historical aspect of it, after I'd been playing music for quite some time, I went on something called the Bicentennial Wagon Train. That was in 1976. And we had formed what was called the Spirit of 76 Wild West show. In that, I was portraying Wild Bill Hickok, and I was doing some historical characters. We did a show in Memphis, Tennessee. I think John mentioned one of you mentioned you stayed in Memphis a little while.
That would be me.
From that, I met a lot of interesting people on the wagon train. The one I was on, there was 5 separate wagon trains. This one started in Texas. And I caught up with them in Memphis at Lakeland Park. We did our show. They all fell in love with it, said, would you please join the wagon train and travel with us? I said, oh, this is going to be interesting. So I did. I joined the Bicentennial Wagon Train, went all the way from Memphis, Tennessee to Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, wound up where General George Washington and all the Revolutionary War soldiers, the militia, and everybody camped. It was their winter quarters there. It was from there he launches there's an attack later on when they crossed the Delaware, that very infamous portrait of him crossing the Delaware, and had the Battle of Trenton. So that's when the bug bit. I wound up at Valley Forge, met some interesting people there. Mike Tully owned some land right next to Valley Forge. His home was there. I began to write jingles, radio jingles. I'm sure y'all have heard radio jingles before. Jingles.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. So I started doing that, and while we, between recording jingles and working in the recording studio, I would go to Valley Forge to the park, made friends with a park ranger, and I always wanted to know where was it that George Washington had his prayer? It's said that he prayed by the stump. He was a defeated general. He had said at Potts' house, which was his headquarters. There was a man named Potts that owned a house there. And it was said that he was sitting in the rocking chair, George Washington, General Washington, sitting there peering into the fireplace, very troubled. And Mr. Potts is trying to carry on the conversation, but George Washington is just peering into the fireplace, thinking about all the problems. He was a defeated general. He gets up, goes outside. There's snow on the ground. He finds a stump. He makes an altar and he prays. And from that, he gets a vision. And that vision is to attack the Hessians, the Germans, and defeat them at Trenton. That's what eventually takes place. So he had divine providence. He had a vision that was given to him from the Lord. And so that stuck with me. When that park ranger took me to that location, he said, this is pretty much where the stump was. And you can still see evidence where an old tree had been, an old stump had been. And so he walked off and left me. And while I was standing there in that area, I heard that voice speak. I heard a voice speak and says, tell my story. And here I am, about a 19-year-old fellow, and 19, 20 years old. And I hear this voice saying, tell my story. So I've been trying to do that ever since, is trying to tell the story about American history, about the truth about George Washington. Because the sad thing is, what do they tell in schools about George Washington?
Oh, we'll get into, there's that there. I mean, I was not taught anything negative about George Washington when I went to school.
But the whole truth was never told. And well, it might have been to us in our era, but to the students today, they don't get the full story. They hear he has, he had wooden teeth, he chopped down a cherry tree, and he wore a white wig. They hear about those things, but they don't hear the rest of the story, or ones like I shared with you about him having a prayer at out in the woods there at Valley Forge. So a lot of the truth gets lost. Go ahead.
Yeah. One thing I think, I don't know if you ever watched the movie, the small miniseries about John Adams. A
little bit.
Yeah. Well, I remember David Morse, he played General Washington. And when it came time for the inauguration scene, they wanted to make that as accurate as they possibly could. And from what I understand, when General Washington took his oath, not everybody could hear him because he spoke rather low.
Right.
But the people that sworn him in felt like they weren't regretting anything because he was very, very sincere about it. When you're sincere about something, people can feed off on that.
Right. They can. And they had offered it for him to be king. The man who would have been king, they wanted him to be King George Washington. And he said, no, you've already had one King George. You don't need two. So he refused. He refused to be a king and wanted it to be done the way it was. And so, a very admirable individual.
Yes. And, when it comes to the case of the Civil War and things we have been told, you know what? I was growing up believing that the Yankees were the good guys and the rebels were the bad guys and they were evil and it was all about slavery. But as I've gotten older, I've learned that was a bunch of Bravo Sierra.
Well, those who win the war write the history books, and that's kind of what took place. And S.D. Lee, which was a general in the Confederate Army, saw that happening, as well as many other veterans of the Southern Army. And so they tried to form an organization, and he helped form something called Sons of Confederate Veterans. And when he did that, that was one of the very things he said. He knew that the true story would never be told, and that those who win the war write the book. So he said, for the next generations to come, all ye sons of Confederate veterans, tell our story, because they're going to call us traitors. All the things they're called now, that's what he predicted they'd be called, the Confederate soldiers to be called. So that's what he did. He put that organization together, and it's something that is still here to this very day, trying to teach the other side of the story. It's very interesting thing that you brought that up about the North and the South. You know, there are good guys and bad guys in both armies, because that's what court martials are for. So there were some got court-martialed on either side because they didn't do the right things, but there was some honorable men on both sides. There's, you know, no doubt about that. But
Absolutely.
the story of the South has been misrepresented for too many years.
Well, for one, I was prior to moving to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, when I was in my early 30s, I was actually warned. They said by people, they were saying, you know, don't be careful going down there. They don't like Northerners. And I'm like, well, I'm not from anywhere near the Mason-Dixon line. That doesn't run very far west of the Mississippi, so I'm not too worried about that. And when I did finally make it south, the hospitality and the compassion of the people that lived there was unbelievable. It was nothing like I was told.
Right. Yeah, my producer, Kevin Keel, he's of German descent, and he born and raised in the New York area, lived in Florida for a while. Then he moves, you know, he was introduced to the South there, I guess. Then he moves to Tennessee, and we're the best of friends. So miracles can happen. And we have a great time together. We work together all the time.
So I grew up in Florida, and I always remembered hearing in the 1980s, hearing things about the South will rise again. That was a common saying. And lo and behold, it did, but it was industry, where the Northern textiles moved down for industry and stuff, reduced labor, lack of union, things like that. And there were questions about Northerners. They didn't have a great reflection upon people in the North. They always thought they were too fast, too rude, and still resentful towards what happened post Civil War.
Right. And let me throw a comment to both of you. You know, you're talking about we were a divided nation during the war, but the rebels, my family, I trace it back. The rebels fought with the Confederate Army. That's just a fact. I can't deny that in my ancestry. But after that, my granddad went to France and fought in World War I. He's a direct descendant of a Confederate veteran, but he goes and fights in the trenches in France, as well as two other his brothers. So 3 rebels are fighting over in France during World War I as doughboys. And then in every war following that, I've had my dad was in the Korean War. So I've had ancestors and people that have fought in all the wars, and they fought under the Stars and Stripes, as well as at one time fighting under the Stars and Bars of that battle flag that's so despised today. So if we're going to honor veterans, you have to honor all of them, because never once did Confederacy stop being Americans. It's CSA, Confederate States of America. So they all were going to be considered Americans. Then in 1956, under the Eisenhower reign, when he was president, they actually passed a law stating that, you know, Confederate veterans are American veterans and should be treated as American veterans. So
absolutely,
that's how official it really is.
Well, we're coming up to the first quarter, and that means we're going to take our first break. But with our first break, of course, is before the 2 commercials play, I'm going to cue your video, actually, Southern Men in a Strange Land. Just take a moment before I cue that song. Take a moment to talk about that a little bit.
Year 2000, you gentlemen can recall this, I'm sure. During year 2000, the world was under a quick change with the COVID epidemic, and we were all locked in our houses, except those that wanted to be out in the riots, and they were given the blessings by a certain party in the Washington, D.C., was giving them blessings to go out. They were immune to the COVID virus, so they didn't even have to wear masks. If they could go out and they could burn buildings all over the country and tear down statues, and it was during this period that they wanted to come to our town to tear down our statue. It's called the Sentinel on the Court Square. And so I caught wind of it. Somebody called me and said they're after a statue in Murray, Kentucky. They're coming after yours next. So I got on the phone, began calling people on my way to Paris, where the statue stood at the Court Square, and said, hey, we have a problem. And before the evening was out, there was 200 of us, most of us armed and dangerous. And we were all standing around the statue, honoring our Second Amendment and First Amendment right, both around that statue, saying, "Not in our town, this statue will stand." And so it's still standing to this very day, but a lot are not. There's a lot of statues around court squares. They're gone. They're nowhere to be seen, and future generations will never see them.
Yeah.
So that's what this song's about. A Southern man in a strange land. It doesn't look like it used to be.
Yes, indeed. Well, we're going to go ahead and cue that, and we'll be back in about 5.5 minutes.
Sounds good, brother. Thank you.
I was born down in Dixie, and there are those who try to fix me. I got rebel blood flowing in my veins. It seems to drive them all insane. I don't buy the lie they sell. I want the truth and not a fairy tale. They don't listen to what I say. They want things just their way. I'm a Southern man in a strange land. The South ain't the place that it used to be. On a court square, here go, there's no statue there for you to see. You can't erase what took place. You have to learn from your mistakes. I'm a Southern man, taking a stand while I can. God save the Southland. My daddy and my grandpa too served that old red, white, and blue. I'm mighty proud of my bloodline, but some won't like what they're gonna find. A loyal son of the South, but I'm a patriot without a doubt. I hate seeing freedom fade away. America kneel and pray. I'm a Southern man in a strange land. America ain't what she used to be. On a court square, you go, there's no statue there for you to see. You can't erase what took place. You have to learn from your mistakes. I'm a Southern man, taking a stand while I can. God save the Southland. I'm a Southern man in a strange land. The South ain't the place that it used to be. On the court square, you go there, there's no statue there for you to see. You can't erase what took place. You have to learn from your mistakes. I'm a Southern man, taking a stand while I can. God save the Southland. God save the Southland. God save the Southland.
I wouldn't have lasted this long in the entertainment industry if I hadn't taken a few risks. But I'm also a realist because I've seen it all. Gold gives you everything the stock market can't. A hedge against inflation, a protection against economic crashes, and the best way to protect your family and their interests. Gold is the only true global currency.
Invest in gold and silver with Noble Gold Investments. Start investing today or get your free gold and silver investment guide by going to thebeardedpatriots.com/affiliates and click on the Noble Gold Investments link.
I'm excited to announce our Christmas extravaganza is finally here. Get this season's flannel sheets for as low as $59.98. They won't last long, so get them while you can. Our famous My Slippers, they haven't been on sale for over a year. Regularly $119.98, now only $59.98. Our 6-piece towel sets are back in stock with extremely limited quantities, only $29.98. With hundreds of MyPillow products, there's something for everyone on your Christmas list. Bathrobes, duvets, quilts, down comforters, and so much more. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to save on all MyPillow products. For example, flannel sheets for as low as $59.98. Or our 6-piece towel sets, just $29.98. But that's not all. I'm extending our 60-day money-back guarantee until March 1st of 2025. Plus, all orders over $75 or more ship absolutely free.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back, joined by Rick Revel, and that was a good song.
Thank you.
I like the Southern rock aspect into it too, but I've listened to a few of your other songs too, and you kind of go old school country as well. Like, not too many people use a steel guitar anymore. So.
Very true. Very true. A lot of people don't. I'm trying to keep it as traditional as possible. So much of the music nowadays it has more of that pop and hip hop feel, and I'm trying to keep it more for the baby boomers, those that grew up with real music.
and the Gen Xers, I'll comment on this really quick. I talked to some time ago. I talked to Mike LaPond, who's the bassist for Symphony X, and also works with Ross, the boss of Man of War too, and he said today's heavy metal is not metal anymore, and he says he relates so much with the country artists because the tradition of his music is like fading away, just like a lot of the tradition of country music seems to be fading away as well.
Yeah, it seems to be the fad is it's going further and further away from traditional sounds. And there's nothing wrong. I think a friend of mine, TJ Cates, Jill's hubby, he mentioned that there's nothing wrong with adding a couple of lanes to the highway. Just don't eliminate the other lanes in the highway. I think it's wide enough for all of us to be there and let the audience decide what music they like.
Yes, indeed. So, John, I think you're waiting to ask a question. I better give you the mic. So. You're muted.
Yeah, I did. I muted myself out during the break. No, I'm sitting there listening to what you're talking about with the music and the genres and stuff. You're right. The genres have shifted so much. If you want to listen to traditional rock and roll anymore, you turn on country.
Yeah.
Like you said, it sounds more and more like Southern rock than it does old country back in the days. I grew up with a father who loved country. I was the rock and roller, but my father was the country guy, Charlie Pride and go way back to Johnny Cash. I like Johnny Cash. I'm just all over the board when it comes to music anyway. I like all sorts of genre. We were talking about taking down statues in that song, man. And I remember when that was happening. And I'm glad to hear that you guys, I think at the beginning of the show, we were talking about that you guys stood up, before the break, you guys stood up to preserve the statue, which was the right thing to do. There's a legal process in which you go through to remove statues in the town square. You don't just get to go rip them down. That's ridiculous. Right. You gotta go through proper channels and go through town councils and stuff, and it has to be a public decision. It's not arbitrary, based on the whims of a select few people. we were talking about history previously, and as I recall, because they talk about the Civil War and stuff being based around slavery, which we know it wasn't. And you can't find this history so much anymore, but a long, long time ago when I was reading history, there was a thing about before there was antitrust laws, because antitrust laws didn't come until the 1880s. So what led up to what's it called? I'm trying to think of the word for abject slavery. What led up to abject slavery was in the North with the Northern textiles and stuff, they were price fixing against the South, and they were buying raw commodities from the South, which was primarily agriculture. It was growing production. And so they were price fixing. So the profit margins weren't there in the South anymore. And it drove slavery. Instead of eliminating slavery, it drove slavery even harder, if I'm not mistaken. Is that relate with your history?
Pretty much so. The industrial age was slavery for the whole at the turn of the right coming from late 1700s into the early 1800s. Slavery was starting to wind down slightly, and by the 1820s, 1830s, it was starting to kind of lose a little bit. But then the industrial age began to grow. Eli Whitney and all the industrial age, everything began to blossom. So it reinvigorated the slavery movement because the North began, because we were dependent a long time, to back up slightly, we were dependent a long time for the Europeans to provide us textiles and what we needed. But then all of a sudden, textile mills were popping up all over the country. Cotton was growing. Every plantation had cotton. And so the demand built. And so slavery just happened to be the mechanism that made it work. As terrible as the institution was, happened to be what made it work. But people in the North were for it just as much as the people in the South, because it was providing what they needed for their factories to operate and to manufacture the goods that were a lot cheaper to produce than to get them imported from Europe. And another thing, it took place in the state of New York. There was the riots of New York that took place. There was a movie called the
Gangs of New York.
Yes, Gangs of New York that Leonardo DiCaprio was in. And
yes,
there was a scene in there where the United States Army comes in, and they're called in to put down a rebellion, and the Irish were refusing to be sent off to war. They did not want to be conscripted, which we would call it the draft today. They didn't want to be conscripted and sent off to war, so they had a big riot. And the United States Army was sent in, fired upon the citizens of New York, and even a naval gunboat fired artillery into the city of New York, which is not taught in history books either. So that takes place, and it's because a lot of these people were working for the machinery. They were working for these industrial men who were dependent on some type of labor, and so the Irish were part of that slave labor. The old saying, working for the company store, that's where it came from, because the company store would get them so far in debt that the employees couldn't pay for it. And so they became indebted and remain indebted to the company store, which the factory they worked for had a company store where they got their goods, their food, their belongings that they need to survive.
That's a line of credit based on their labor, but they wouldn't make enough work or enough income to cover the credit, and so
they couldn't cover the credit. That's correct, sir.
They had mill houses up here in the North. That they would provide living quarters for these people, so they were indebted to the industry itself.
They were
wrapped into it. I've seen it happen in modern day times. I actually had a friend who had a business of his own, and his employees, he housed them, he fed them, and at the end of the week he would deduct for all that he fed and housed and everything. Tell me when it was done, they might have had $10 left to their name.
And then
I didn't like what he did.
And in the coal industry in Kentucky and West Virginia, places like that, that happened during the early 1900s. A lot of people got in debt to the company store during the boom of the coal industry, when a lot of these people in the Appalachian country were in coal mines digging for coal. A lot of that happened during that period too. They would owe their souls to the company store.
So a lot of people also don't realize, talking about rebellions and stuff. Shays Rebellion, you're familiar with that? And so would you like to elaborate on that a little bit?
You've got different rebellions that took place. One of the first ones was George Washington had to deal with was the Whiskey Rebellion. Anytime you start levying taxes and start talking about things of that nature, I think it's when the public. You mentioned it in your intro of your show. It's time to speak your voice and to get out. And so a lot of times that's what takes place in these little rebellions that pop up. And the federal government, it's how they respond to it. Andy Jackson, North Carolina, I believe it was, or either South Carolina, wanted to secede at one time, and Andrew Jackson, was going to send troops over there to keep them from seceding. So there's nothing wrong with speaking up when it comes time. If you feel you're being overtaxed or something's taking place, it's right to speak up. The first test, though, came through the Whiskey Rebellion with George Washington. He literally had to put on his uniform again and go out to put down the rebellion. So we have a lot of different events that take place in our history that do question, what's happening in Washington, D.C., and is it fair or not? So.
At the beginning of the nation, people were under the impression that we were fighting for freedom to eliminate taxation. And so when they started taxing whiskey, people flipped out. The time when Washington
It is. And that goes along with a song that I've put out now called Son of a Moonshiner. And a lot of these boys up in the hills had fought in the Revolutionary War during that Whiskey Rebellion. And so a lot of them came out and said, General, we fought with you. Now we're going to have to fight against you. Said, this tax is unfair. So we've had several incidents in American history where we've had to stand up and let our voice be heard. And it was just ironic that George Washington wound up in that little debacle. Yeah, and it was early on in his presidency when it took place. So
I don't think, I was right at the beginning, I believe. I don't think that it was a mark on him necessarily. I don't think he was there to do battle. He's there just to shut down a rebellion, which by the time he could arrive, it was pretty much over anyway. They were done.
It pretty much was. But all these different events take place in American history. I think one of the biggest healing events that took place after the war, which we refer to as the Civil War, or War of Northern Aggression is better put, but a lot of people call it the American Civil War. Something took place down in the Panama area, not Panama, but in Cuba area, where one of our ships was destroyed, and troops were sent down to Cuba, and Teddy Roosevelt was part of that. And you have the Rough Riders, and that was one of the things that kind of tied us all back together as a country. All the little rebellions and disagreements aside, you have that one thing that takes place to where you have some veterans. You have veterans of the Civil War that fought for the South. They're now joining up to go fight down the Spanish-American War. They're heading down that way, and they're gone to Texas to drill and to train with the Rough Riders, and they win the war. And but there's a lot of Southern blood that goes there. McKinley was thinking very seriously. President McKinley at the time was thinking that this could cause a rebellion. This could cause problems because the troop trains that's carrying the troops down to Florida to catch the ships out carrying them to Cuba. They felt that as the trains went through the South, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, and all these areas, that there would be some type of flashback. There'd be something to come back on them for doing that. Might be a rebellion along the railroad lines, but actually you had veterans of the Civil War standing there waving stars and stripes, and some waving the old Confederate battle flag, waving at their sons and their grandsons as they're going off to war. So that kind of pulled the country together. Then World War I and World War II definitely brought us all together better as a country, I feel.
I think people, it wasn't a matter of not loving your country. They usually patriotized to the country. It's kind of one of those, you mess with my brother, you got a problem. I can fight with my brother, but you mess with my brother, you got a problem.
That's right. That's how it works.
Yeah.
So we're actually going to skip the bottom of the hour break because the next break, of course, is going to be about 6 minutes long with the next song that I'm going to play. Before I get to that, though, I want to shift gears to the present. Of course, you mentioned, the year 2020, the summer of love, COVID, and of course, I'm going to say the biggest the biggest mess of an election we've ever had in my generation, anyway, in my lifetime.
Election fraud.
A lot of that too. I mean, I knew that Bush was steering us in the wrong direction. Obama steered us further in the wrong direction. I was very skeptical of Trump when he first ran for office, because I thought it was more of a celebrity hoax or a sham.
Right.
Because I mean, who is Donald Trump? He's a celebrity. He was in WWE, and
Right,
before that, Lifestyle of the Rich and Famous. He's an entrepreneur. He's a rich and powerful man, but is he a politician? No. What does he know about politics? And is this going to be another puppet they're putting in there? All those questions were going through my mind, but I knew that he was a better choice than Hillary, but I was still very skeptical when I voted for him in 2016. And didn't take long, and my opinion changed, and I realized I really made the right choice when I voted for Donald Trump. And then, of course, 2020 happens, COVID happens. So, the economy was booming, and now it comes to a halt because
a screeching halt. You could hear the brakes squealing. You could. It come to a screeching halt. It did.
And I do believe to this day that election was still stolen, but I think everything happens for a reason, because I think maybe it was good that we had the last 4 years of Biden, because would we have known would the majority of Americans have known what a mess the government was if we didn't have Biden in there making a mess of things? But I'd like to get your take from the beginning of Trump's presidency up until now, and how you feel the direction the country is going.
Let me clarify something. I'm a Reagan Democrat. I was born in a family that says, I asked my mom, my first time I was going to vote. I said, Mom, I want to vote. And she said, how should we vote? And she says, honey, we've been Democrats all of our lives, and that's how we're going to vote. We're going to vote Democrat. Okay. So I voted for Jimmy Carter. And I had a small business I had just started. And inflation just boom. And I started watching these gas lines, and I started watching all this stuff start to happen. And then the interest rate on my loan that I had gotten for my small business went out the roof. And I'm going, huh. And they were getting ready to call my note at the bank. And I'm going, huh. So when Reagan comes along, I said, So I began to look more into his way of doing things and that side of it. So that was my first introduction to thinking about voting Republican. So when it come to Donald Trump, to vote for him, it's like, he's saying some of the things Reagan would say, and he's saying some of the things that make sense when I'm looking at my billfold and looking at my bank account. So it wasn't too hard to make that decision. Then we enter into the 2020 era, and it was like, I hated what took place, because I felt the election had been stolen. I felt there was a lot of things underhanded took place. But it took those 4 years. Any time that you go through a hard time, it makes you appreciate the good times. And so we had to go through that as a country in order for us to be able to see that, and new people voted for Trump that never had voted for Trump. Some people had hated Trump early on, but they decided to vote for him. And why? Because they had suffered through the last 4 years, but they were looking at it from their perspective, not what MSNBC or CNN's telling them how they should feel. They're thinking for themselves, and they're saying, oh, my bank account is nearly empty, and I could look back a few years ago during the Trump era, and it wasn't. We were actually doing pretty good, and gas was less expensive, and my hot dogs and my eggs and all these different things were less expensive then, but now I'm paying all this, and my paycheck has not grown any. Common sense takes over. So the last 4 years, I think the country needed it. Not that I would want us to go through it ever again, but I think we needed it. We needed to see Joe Biden go through his senility. We needed to see him at that point. My dad had Lewy bodies dementia, so he suffered through dementia. And so I'm watching on television Joe Biden do the same things that my dad did, suffering through dementia. And my dad was not capable of taking care of himself. I took care of him for 5 years. He could not take care of himself. So to have somebody in the White House that I know can't take care of themselves, trying to make decisions for me, that's scary.
And then, of course, you got Kamala Harris, who, the Democrats didn't want her back in 2019, and she finished dead last in the Democratic race then. And we look at her history as a attorney general in the state of California. She almost let an innocent person die, and was willing to ignore the evidence that exonerated him, and of course it was demanded that she released it. Otherwise, he'd have been dead.
Yeah,
you know,
on the personal things, every candidate can have their personal faults and things that they've done that you can go, that was terrible. I just wish they hadn't have done that. But just the pure legal standpoint, you've got somebody that never went through a primary, that never went through the legal process of being approved to be a candidate for the presidency. And they get to be the nominee? How? They did go through a primary. It was too convenient for this. It was a setup. It was too convenient for that to take place.
In all honesty, we did see during the Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders debacle there, where Bernie Sanders was the forerunner, and they appointed Hillary Clinton in his place. So he rightfully should have won that primary. And when they took it to court, and Bernie Sanders supporters wanted their money back more or less from the DNC and took it to court, and the judge says, well, see, the Democrat National Committee is a corporation, and the corporation can pick its champion. So basically, he basically said your vote in the primary doesn't mean anything. The delegates and super delegates are the ones that matter.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. It's they turned our election system on its ear this year. That's all I can say.
Yes. Well, we're going to come up and cue our final break, which will include a very good song. As much as I love the first song, the Southern Man song, is I love that song, but I like this one even more.
Is it Roll Freightliner Roll?
No, it's
no. Darn it! See, as a truck driver, I know that song. I checked that one out today. I really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that was written for a friend of mine that actually drove a Freightliner all of his life. He was a career truck driver. He and I wrote that together. He played dobro. He and I wrote that together.
Nice.
There you go. That's why John likes it. John loves his 18-wheelers.
There you go.
No, the one I love though is called "Keep 'Em Flying, Boys."
Keep 'em flying, boys. Oh my, buddy. Now
Yes.
that one there is a rally song for darn sure. You want me to tell you the story behind it?
When we come back, let's cue
Yeah.
the song first, and we'll be back in about 6 minutes.
We'll do it.
All right.
A massive Confederate flag flying high above a local interstate. The Sons of Confederate Veterans raised this large flag earlier today as the Confederate flag is once again in the spotlight.
NASCAR already banning it at all races, and tonight our Dave Faraday.
Keep on flying, boys. The flags of our fathers keep on flying, boys. They're flags like no others. Thousands died in the shadow, so we must not destroy the flags of our fathers. Keep on flying, boys. In honor of Dixie, great-granddad marched off to war. And deep in his heart, he knew what he was fighting for. But there are those among us who want to take those colors down from where the valiant have fallen, from what is now sacred ground. Keep on flying, boys. The flags of our fathers keep on flying, boys. Their flags like no others. Thousands died in their shadow, so we must not destroy the flags of our fathers. Keep on flying, boys. I saw it in the paper, they called it a flag of hate. They don't want our colors flying o'er the fallen's grave. We must draw a battle line, for the truth must be told. It's time, sons and daughters, to stand and be bold. Keep on flying, boys. The flags of our fathers keep on flying, boys. Their flags like no others. Thousands died in their shadow, so we must not destroy flags of our fathers. Keep on flying, boys. We must stand today, tomorrow is too late. Liberty will go away, 'cause tyranny is at the gate. Keep on flying, boys. The flags of our fathers keep on flying, boys. Their flags like no others. Thousands died in their shadow, so we must not destroy the flags of our fathers. Keep on flying, boys. Thousands died in their shadow, so we must not destroy the flags of our fathers. Keep on flying, boys.
New tonight, the court says Alpharetta can ban the Confederate flag in the Old Soldiers' Day parade. The case started in 2019 when the city said the Sons of Confederate Veterans could participate in the parade but couldn't use the Confederate flag. Two members sued, saying Alpharetta violated the group's constitutional right to free speech. Today, the 11th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals upheld a lower court's ruling that favored the district.
America's under attack, and they're all around us. I'm talking about liberal Democrats, and they're out to destroy everything that we've worked so hard for. Mammoth Nation's here to fight for you. You only get one vote, so let's join forces. We support conservative lawmakers and the causes you hold so dearly. We stand behind our police, veterans, the Second Amendment, and much more. We need your help, so join today.
Hi, it's the Big Voice Guy, the one who intros and promos the show you're listening to right now. Hi, my name is Jim Hunt. I voice for a growing list of internet and terrestrial radio stations, podcasts, and businesses. I'd love to spread the word about yours too, no matter if the message is serious or silly. Whether you want the delivery to be hard-hitting, voice of authority, or conversational, warm and fuzzy. From fully produced station imaging and commercials to custom phone system messages on hold and IVR prompts, voiceovers for computer games to narrations for presentations, even post-production, audio editing, and audio cleanup services. Yeah, I do them too. I'm your guy. I do business as Jim Hunt Voiceovers and Audio Services. My rates are reasonable and negotiable because I love internet radio too. Visit my website, jimhuntvo.com. I'm Jim Hunt, at your service. Put my voice and audio production skills to work for you. Let's do this.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back for our final segment. Got about 10 minutes left here. Joined, of course, by Rick Revel. And I got to say something too. When we talk about that time when they wanted to pretty much ban the what they call the Confederate flag. I was living in Ohio when all that was happening. And some people can call that Yankee territory if they want to. But I'm going to tell you, even up there, the support for waving the Confederate flag was phenomenal. And people flying it out of the back of their trucks up there, too. I just can't imagine how it was in the South. So,
yeah, it's interesting. You know, I've seen pictures of people up in the state of Michigan, the same thing. They're flying the battle flag out of the bed of their truck. See, it seems the battle flag seems to be the most offensive when the South had dozens of flags. They had the first national, second, and third national flags that was called stainless banner. Then they had to put a red bar on it to make it more distinguishable. So they had actually 3 different national flags, the Confederacy did. Then they had the Bonnie Blue flag. They had several other flags. The battle flag started out as the naval jack, and they reduced it and made a square version of it and made a battle flag out of it. So the one that most people fly is more of the naval jack. It's more the rectangular, but the one that's square is an actual battle flag, and you'll see a lot of them in museums across the country. But that seems to be the one that actually is the most offensive, as they call it. It is actually called the St. Andrew's Cross. Comes from comes from the Irish Scottish. It comes from that side of the world. If you look at a lot of flags from Europe, they have that type of emblem on them. When the South put it together, they wanted it because they had a whole different reasoning than what modern day think puts upon it. So they felt it was their state right as well. It was, you know, it had a spiritual message to them. Most of these people were churchgoers. Most of them were God-fearing individuals. So when they took that flag into battle, they prayed to God. One of the biggest revivals in the country took place right after the Battle of Chickamauga. There were 10,000 Confederate soldiers saved, and the revival that took place spilled across the Chickamauga River into the Union camps, and there were several thousand Union soldiers were saved. So these were not atheists. These were not people that were agnostic. You know, these were people that were people of faith. They had a lot of faith in the Lord Jesus, and so they were not afraid to speak up about the Lord and about God and about Jesus Christ. Contrary to how we want to label it today, we might try to label it as if they were all ignorant individuals and had no intelligence whatsoever. You can find that in all class and all walks of life. But if you go back, some of the best colleges in the country were in the South during that period. But that's not talked about either.
Of course not.
Wasn't it to my understanding that every state had their own battle flag, and the one that you're referring to was the Virginia Confederate battle flag?
Every state, down to every community, had their own. Each company would have their own. Sometimes would adopt the regimental flag, but each company would have their own oftentimes. So the story of the flag is quite intriguing. That is a history lesson within itself, just the story and the topic of the flags. So.
Yeah.
It's very similar to the way you look at the history of South Africa, too. You know, you can ask Colonel Wyatt about this, too. But, of course, you know, they have what they call the apartheid flag, which consists, you look at it, of course, there's 3 flags that are pictured within that so-called apartheid flag, one of them being the British double cross, as I like to call it. But one of them is for the Orange Free State, and the other one I forgot which has escaped my mind, of course, which I actually have those 2 flags separately, of course. And, you know, South Africa has a very, very similar history. And like I said before, the United States mirrors South Africa in a lot of ways, like where did pulling down start?
Right.
South Africa. Yes.
So, in regarding your song, "Keep on Flying, Boys," is that basically about preserving your own sense of culture?
the Keep 'em Flying Boys was triggered by the same emotion that Southern Man was triggered by. There's been several periods we've gone through during the 1990s, about mid 94, 95. I had a publication called Revel, Rick Revel's Wake Up Call to America. And in that, I said, if we do not take care of every piece of American history, the complete and total part of American history, eventually they'd start picking it apart one piece at a time. And I was referring to Southern history because a lot of times, if you do not take care of all of it, they will pick it apart. They'll come after every little thing, Native American culture, they'll come after all of it. And so I said, watch it. This will happen if we do not, because I'd already seen during the Clinton era, there was threats of coming after the flag. We'd seen threats of it then. And it increased as time. Nikki Haley, when she took office, she made the flag come down off the Capitol building because she was, she gave in to the public outcry of a handful of people. But then you had a majority of the people said, leave it alone. That flag didn't bother any of us, just as the statues didn't bother any of us. So that's where that Keep 'em Flying Boys came from. And then they also desecrate our graves. A lot of those flags we have a Confederate Memorial Day, which is basically the weekend after Memorial Day takes place across the country. We have a Confederate Memorial Day in June, and we'll make sure we decorate all the graves. And they'll take, if we have a battle flag that's put on the grave, most likely it's gone by the next morning or a day or two after. So they desecrate the graves. They'll tear down the flags that we put on them, and they'll also take spray paint and paint the stones, or take a sledgehammer and break the rocks.
I think you need some game cams out there.
I
signs of knowledge in game cams. That way you can catch them.
Yes.
Yeah. These people now with all the little cameras we can put out now, we can catch them a lot easier. But during the 1990s, that was not a prevalent thing. So they can be spotted a lot easier now than they used to. So be aware of anybody out there wanting to desecrate a grave. We can find you.
One thing I got to add to the conversation too is, whereas I was getting irritated with Taylor Sheridan because everything was taking so long to come back, I think he really did a good job in telling some history Native American history with Yellowstone and the spin-offs of that there really wasn't this animosity between white people and Native Americans, like they want us to believe, that they want to call my ancestors who came from Europe land thieves and whatnot. But you watch 1883 and you'll see that the land was actually given to James Dutton, and of course that Native American chief said in 7 generations, though, we're going to want it back. And of course, you see the end of Yellowstone, and the prophecy came true. And at the end, you see they're trying to push over the graves, and that one guy, Mo, he says, no, you leave these graves alone because these people protected this land. So there wasn't that type of animosity that people really think there was. Right. Taylor Sheridan's doing a great job of bringing that to light.
And I think that's something we have to focus on, is the fact that a lot of times the things that we're told, especially early on Hollywood, you take some of the things that were done back in the 40s and 50s and early into the 60s, how they portrayed Westerns and things of that nature was probably 95, 96% fiction. And you might have just that much history involved that could tell a story. The rest of it's just fictionalized. And so most history that people get today, they don't really teach it in schools, to be honest with you. I've been into school systems. I've worked in public schools. I've worked at colleges and universities doing George Washington and telling the stories of American history as a first-person portrayal, as doing these characters. And I have students and I have teachers and professors walk up to me and say, I didn't know that. And I get that all the time. So Hollywood has been our main teacher for many years. And so if you watch a movie about Pearl Harbor and it's made in Hollywood, well, it's to entertain you. You might learn a little bit about Pearl Harbor did take place, but most of the rest of that movie is just to entertain you. And so that's usually the case, unless it's a documentary-based film. Most of the time, it's made to entertain you, to get your money, to get you to watch the commercials, to get you to do whatever, but it's about the money. What I try to do, yes, I get paid for what I do, but I try to teach you the truth about American history, and I think it's very important that we do that. First, the American Indians, misunderstood from day one, but before we got here, before the white man ever got here, they were committing war on each other. You can look back through their own history.
Yes.
And they were making slaves of each other. They were annihilating other tribes and clans. They were considered clans. They would annihilate the other ones. The ones that didn't kill and annihilate, they made slaves.
Mm-hmm.
So all that was taking place before Christopher Columbus or any of the Vikings or anybody of European descent set foot here. That was taking place.
You had aggressive tribes and you have ones that were more peaceful. It's true.
Yes.
Yeah. So anytime you put you put people on a same section of land, it's always going to be a power struggle. I don't care what color your skin is. I don't care where you are. There's going to be somebody that's going to flex their muscles and say, I want what they got and I'm going to take it. I don't care what culture you're in. That has happened since the dawn of time.
Yes,
certainly has.
And that's the facts. we all have good people in our cultures, and we have those that want to rise up in power and cause problems.
I hate to say it, but we are out of time. Rick, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. And of course, we got your website going on at the ticker, but if somebody's listening on audio, how can they find you?
Just find me at rickrevelmusic.com for all the music that we put out, rickrevelmusic.com. And then for the acting and for the things we do on television, just rickrevel.com. If you would like for us to come perform in your area, go to that website. There's a way to tag us and leave a comment so we can track you down by email. If you want us to come perform in your area, just let us know. We'd be glad to sing a little bit for you and talk about American history.
Absolutely. So on tap for next week, of course, for New Year's Eve, we're going to be speaking with Dr. Rima Libo. She's going to have some interesting stuff exposing the elite groups like the World Health Organization and the World Economic Forum. So, yes, got some stuff to talk about there. But for you, Rick, and all of our listeners, and you, John, I want to wish you all a very Merry Christmas, and God bless you. And looking forward to 2025.
Same here. God bless everybody and Merry Christmas.
Absolutely. And as I always say, God save the Republic of the United States of America.
Events of recent history indicate that Americans are setting a course for the end of their own great nation. The ever-growing trend in this country is to judge people not by their individual character, but by their identity as a member of a specific group. No one has ever succeeded or failed in life as a result of their group affiliation. A person's success or failure is also not based on luck, but on the sum total of the decisions that they have made. Those who succeed do so through good work ethic and the wise use of their power to choose. The opposite is true of those who fail. The ideals of individual accountability and responsibility in the United States are dying every day. A gun cannot be responsible for a death, just as a shovel cannot be responsible for digging a ditch. Both are only tools and have no will of their own. Responsibility is an adjunct of conscious choice and is the price we pay for freedom. Freedom is also a tool. It's an essential tool that is needed by human beings if they are to prosper rather than to merely survive. Yet there are those who would rather trade their freedom for security. Some believe that it is the responsibility of government to provide freedom. In truth, we form government to ensure and protect the freedom that is already inherently ours.